So I would be talking more on the working principles. And the first thing which comes to my mind is that if you want to cool any fluid, for an example, and without using any additional refrigeration or air conditioning equipment, the maximum we can bring it down is theoretically to the dry bulb temperature of the ambience. But is there a way to bring down the temperature lower than the ambient temperature? And yes, there is a way. And what is the way? And that's what we say evaporative cooling. And that's what we will cover in the coming few slides. So there are various methods of cooling which are available. As Shukri mentioned before, we can have air cooled way of rejecting the heat to the atmosphere. That means the heat is being rejected to the atmosphere using the ambient dry bulb temperature. And the alternate method which I gave an introduction, that which can bring down the temperature even lower than the dry bulb temperature, and that method is called evaporative cooled method. And also we call it as water cooled method. And then there is a third method which is a hybrid of wet and dry, where we use either air or water depending on the season, depending on the day temperature, and depending on the requirements. Or otherwise there is another way of cooling it, which is called adiabatic. So both hybrid and adiabatic, they are dependent both on dry bulb and wet bulb temperatures, whereas the air cooled method is dependent only on the dry bulb temperature, whereas evaporative cooled methods are based on wet bulb temperature. And as Shukri showed in slide, that dry bulb is always higher than the wet bulb temperature. And if we look at the Middle East region, typically there is a difference of more than 10 degrees centigrade between the dry bulb and wet bulb. Now, how important is this difference? This 10 degrees centigrade translates into what? Does it mean that we have some savings in terms of energy, or how do we save that energy? We will see in the coming slides. But the thing which we should pick it up from here is that the evaporative cooling is based on wet bulb temperature, and the wet bulb temperature is always lower than the dry bulb temperature. And typically for Middle East region, the difference is more than 10 degrees centigrade. Now let us look at a typical water-cooled HVAC system, just to bring where the cooling tower is installed in the system and what is its function. So what we see here is there are two circuits. One is chilled water circuit, which is connected to the evaporator of the chiller and which circulates the chilled water to the air handling units and the fan coil units, which in turn cools the conditioned space, or the space which we want to bring down the temperature, for an example, our offices, our residences, or our shopping mall. And the other circuit which is connected to it is called condenser water circuit, which connects which takes away the heat from the evaporator and rejects the heat to the atmosphere. And in this circuit, we connect a cooling tower to the condenser. So the cooling tower is typically installed in an open space, and it rejects the heat to the atmosphere using water in between. Now, let us look at the principles of evaporative cooling. How does a cooling tower works? So what we see typically in a cooling tower, we see that there is a hot water which comes in the cooling tower. Here it is shown from the top in a red box, and the cool water comes out from the cooling tower shown in a blue box below. The cold air enters inside the cooling tower, and what comes out of the cooling tower is a hot and humid air. So which means there is some heat transfer taking place between water and air. Now, how this heat transfer is taking place, we know that it may be sensible, it may be latent. So the question is that what is happening inside the cooling tower? Is it only a sensible heat transfer, or is it a latent heat transfer, or is it a combination of both? We will see it in the coming slide, but before we move to the next slide, I just wanted to define few basic parameters which are very important for an evaporative cooling equipment or a cooling tower. So the temperature in of water, which is represented here in, is the water inlet temperature, which is from the condenser out, condensed cooling tower in temperature. and the temperature which goes out of the cooling tower represented as T out. So the difference between Tn and T out represents a very important term called range. So the range of a cooling tower is the difference of the temperature between in and out. The another important parameter on which the performance of the cooling tower is based is the ambient wet bulb temperature, which is represented here as TWB, and which helps us to define another very important term, which is the approach. The approach is the difference of temperature between water out temperature minus the wet bulb temperature of the ambient air. So with this, I move to the next slide to find out, as I raised the question before, that yes, there is a heat transfer between water and air, but what kind of heat transfer is it? Is it a sensible heat transfer or a latent heat transfer? So if we look at it, both the heat transfers are taking place in an evaporative cooling equipment, both sensible and latent. So sensible heat transfer normally takes place because of the delta T temperature difference. And typically, if we take 1 kilogram of air and how much heat is removed, if 1 kilogram of air is the temperature drops down by 1 degree centigrade, it is approximately 1 kilojoule per degree centigrade. Now, if we see the other type of heat transfer, which is latent heat transfer, or also we call as the latent heat of vaporization, that means how much heat is required to convert 1 kilogram of water to vapor. And as per the thermodynamics, everyone knows that approximately 2300 kilojoules of heat is required to convert 1 kilogram of water from water into vapor. So just to give a comparison that for air, 1 kg of air, the heat transfer for per degree centigrade is approximately 1 kilojoule, whereas for evaporating 1 kilogram of water from water into vapor form, it takes approximately 2300 kilojoules. So that is why the evaporative cooling is very, very efficient, and with a small amount of water, uh, we get so much of heat extraction from the remaining water. So what happens in an evaporation is that there is an interaction between water and the air, and approximately 1% of the water gets evaporated. And for converting the water from its liquid phase to the vapor phase, we need approximately 2300 kilojoules of heat per kg of water. And that is why the remaining water which is there, it gets cooled. And that is why we see that T out is much lower than T in when we look at the cooling tower. Now, what is happening inside a cooling tower? If a mechanical engineer wants to see it, I mean, how it is happening, what is happening thermodynamically, we know that there is a hygrometric chart, and the important aspects on a hygrometric chart are dry bulb temperatures, which are the horizontal lines, and we have vertical lines, which represents the moisture content. Then we have inclined lines, which represents the wet bulb and the enthalpy lines. And on the bottom of it, what we see is a saturated 100% saturated line. So if in case there is a change in moisture content from, let us say, 15 to 25, it means we see an addition of water vapor. And if there is a change in enthalpy, it represents the change in heat. So with this little introduction of the hygrometric chart, I will show you how when we plot the actual evaporation process which is taking place inside the cooling tower, how we can represent it on a hygrometric chart. So if you see here, the dry air enters at a point A inside the cooling tower, and then it moves towards point B. So what we see is a water vapor addition, and then we say that air gets saturated. Let us say if the dry bulb temperature of air is known to us for Dubai today is, let's say, 24 degrees centigrade right now is the dry bulb temperature. And if the wet bulb temperature of air is known to us, or if we know the percentage RH, so percentage RH is around 50%. So we can plot this point on a hygrometric chart A, and then air moves when it enters inside the cooling tower, the vapor, water vapors are added to it, and air becomes saturated, and it touches the 100% saturation line. What is shown it here as a line from A to B. And further to that, the air, we see a change in the enthalpy from point B to C. It moves along the saturation line, which means the air is getting the heat, because as I mentioned before, change in enthalpy represents the change in heat. So the air gains this heat from the water and the water becomes cool. So this is how the evaporative cooling works in a cooling tower. Now, if we look at a complete system, HVAC system, because cooling tower is a part of HVAC system, and ultimately our objective is to optimize a HVAC system. We don't want to look at cooling tower as an silo or as a separate item. We want to look at a complete HVAC system. And as we know, in a complete HVAC system, uh, there is an evaporator, there is a compressor, and there is a condenser and a cooling tower. So if we look at the power consumption, the chiller is the chiller compressor, it consumes the most power. So now how to optimize this system so that we get the minimum total cost of ownership? We'll go to the next slide, but before we go there, what we want to show here is that a total heat rejection or a heat transfer capacity is dependent on two parameters, as we know. One is the flow and other is the delta T. Now, the question is that we defined two terms, range and approach, before in the first slide. So who is controlling the range and who is controlling the approach? Is it the cooling tower which is controlling this delta T, or is it somebody else or some other equipment? So the answer is that the chiller controls the range and the cooling tower controls the approach. So there is a general misconception. Sometimes people feel that it is the cooling tower which is controlling the range or the delta T across the cooling tower or across the chiller condenser, but it is the chiller which is controlling the range. But what is being controlled by cooling tower is the approach. And then we will see how does it impact the overall total cost of ownership. Now I have another question in mind. If I have to select a cooling tower and someone tells me, okay, I have a chiller of 1000 tons cooling capacity, what kind of cooling tower will you offer me? And so my reply would be that yes, we can select and offer a cooling tower to you, but there is no one single solution for that. The same, we can offer many cooling towers for the same installation, depending on the parameters what it requires. So this slide, what I'm trying to show here is I have selected one cooling tower. The same cooling tower can deliver 4300 kilowatt, but the same cooling tower can deliver less also, 1100 kilowatt. But why? It's because of the various variables. So it depends on what kind of range it is working on, what kind of approach it is working on. And so the example shows that the same cooling tower can give you different capacities at different approach at different range. Now, if you want to optimize the system, that how much should be the range, how much should be the approach, so that the total cost of ownership of the system is reduced or the system is optimized. In the next slide, I will show you that how we can optimize the complete chilled water system. So in the complete chilled water system here, what we show are two major components. One of them is a cooling tower and other is the chiller, compressor power. So if you look at the diagrams below, you will notice that the cooling tower size is varying from smaller. As we move to the right hand side, it becomes bigger. But you will also notice that the chiller size is reducing as a result. On the left hand side, the chiller size is the biggest, and as we move towards right, it reduces. So we have to optimize between the size of the chiller and the size of the cooling tower. And how we can do it? We can do it by playing with the approach. So if we take the example on the left hand side, it shows a higher approach of 10 degrees centigrade, which would mean that we require a smaller cooling tower but a bigger chiller. But when we move towards the right hand side where we have the approach of 2 degrees centigrade, but what we see, yes, a bigger cooling tower, but the main advantage of it is that the chiller size is reduced drastically. So what is more important is to look at the total power consumption, which is a combination of chiller compressor power plus the cooling tower power. And our studies show and our optimization shows that we should design for smaller approaches, which means a little bigger cooling tower, but it means that we are reducing the chiller size. That means the total power consumption of the complete system would be lower than the system other way around, where we have a smaller cooling tower but a bigger chiller. Now, if you plot this on pressure enthalpy diagram, what I was highlighting in the previous slide, uh, we can see that there's a vapor compression cycle, and the difference between the leaving chilled water temperature, which represents the evaporation, and the leaving condenser water temperature in case of a water cooled system represents the lift of the compressor. And higher the lift means higher the power consumption of the compressor, and compressor, as I mentioned before, consumes much higher power as compared to the cooling tower. So once we move the system from air cooled to the water cooled, we reduce the lift. And second is, if we further optimize the system and reduce the approach, as I highlighted in the previous slide, approximately 1 degree reduction in condenser water temperature means 3% reduction in the power of the compressor. So this is how we can optimize the system, and we can reduce the total cost of ownership, and we can run the most efficient system. With this, I hand it over to my colleague to cover the next subject. Thank you.